Cool. All right. So, a couple things as we get going here. So, I know like that this, like at least it is for me. This last week and a half or so has been kind of a slog getting through this stuff. I'm kind of like drag and I've kind of lost my zeal for this part of the class. It's so I totally sympathize with it, but that's okay. If we could get through today and get through this part, it gets cool again. It's going to get really badass again for a while. So we just have to get through this bit. It's like I feel like this part got dragged out way too long, and I wanted to actually hit on all the subjects that we went through during the Wise 301 the integration stuff, and it's critically important, but man, it's just got stretched out for so long that it just felt like, I mean, when we started this was like years ago. So stick with it for just now. Like I took my own little personal notes. Like this is the first time we've gone through this one for this class, so I learned a lot on this one. But yeah, stick with it because we're about to like dive into a bunch of like really, I think, fascinating stuff coming up again soon. So what we're gonna do today is wrap up on 8 and actually discuss 9. Like I didn't require you to do 9, but it's lesson 9 on the Unity 301 stuff. But it's actually, it took me, I literally did it this morning in 15 minutes, the lesson 9 one. You don't have to do it. It wasn't part of my requirement one. I didn't even open Unity. I just read through it real fast, and then I just did it. It's only 4 questions on the Unity website. So it's like, it's a fast one. So it's not too bad. So if you want to just like blast through that one and just get it done, cool. So my plan is I've gone through the 301. I feel okay with it, but I'm gonna actually wrap around. So I actually have 2 Audio Kinetic profiles. So I have my like Gmail one, and then I have like a Comcast one, which is kind of like my dummy one. So that basically I can go through. So I went through and got all my quizzes done with my official profile. So I have like the grades that I need. But then I'm gonna go back and I'm gonna reread, and I'm gonna take the quizzes a few more times just as practice, and then I'm gonna actually go through and take the 301 exam just so I can get my certification. But I don't think anybody's gone through and actually done their either with the 101 certification yet. Did anybody actually do that? I don't know. Did anybody get their 101 actual pay for it? Um, it's it's a little bit harder than the actual quizzes as you go along because you can't restart them. You get one shot at it, like, and it's $200. And it takes like 2 hours to get through it. So you want to study really hard for this thing. So I'm going to live through this thing 2 more times while I still kind of have this on the brain a little bit. So I think that's probably what I'll do probably next week is try and loop through this on the side just because I want to get through and get better at this thing. Because the truth is, I mean, and while this, like I said, this is a bit of a slog getting through this stuff. This is critically important if you actually want to do this for work with a team. Being able to be like reasonably confident. I'm sure every project has its snags and has its learning curves and has its issues, but being able to drop into a project and start implementing the stuff with confidence, and even just knowing what you can and can't do, right? Every day is a lesson of like, oh my God, this is so much stuff. But and we'll talk a little bit more about like extending our learning at the end of this class today. But what I'm going to do today, because actually, has anybody actually done lesson 8 yet? I'm curious. Okay. It's a, it's a, it's a pain in the ass. So, um, basically, it's a pain in the ass because we haven't really talked about the music systems in Wise because I don't know it yet. And so that's what we're kind of doing this a little bit out of order, but we're gonna be doing the music systems in next semester. So we're gonna spend a lot more time talking about the music and talking a little bit more about the compositional approach for doing for working with music. But the stuff we'll talk about today will give us a little bit of an insight on that, as to that approach. So so I'm not going to be able to get through everything today on the lesson 8 because I'm only going to get through about probably half of it. Because I'm not gonna go through all of it just because it's just straight up code, and it's just like for me, like slogging through this code and watching me do it and struggle with it isn't going to help you. So what I want you to do is it's literally following the directions. I'm going to go through some of the code stuff in the beginning, but then it becomes a lot of like code theory. And to be honest, without like it, and it's all like I understand it, but it's like for me to synthesize this stuff on my own would be like next to impossible at this point. So I would say for our own studies is just go through and just you can figure it out. Like in fact, I did the quiz like whatever 2 days ago when I was doing this. I went through, I read everything, but I didn't actually even open up Unity, and I just read the PDF of the thing, and I was able to ace the quiz. Um, so like you can do it without even actually doing the thing. It would be it would behoove you to actually do it because it'll be like a lot better if you actually learn the stuff. But you can get away with this by just kind of gliding through it. Um, so anyway, so let's talk a little bit about this thing. Let me share my screen and let's talk a little bit about what we're gonna look at today. So let's do Unity. Let's open up these two projects. Throw pull up the chat, pull you guys over here. Sorry, I'm trying to find my window. This my there it is. The chat window always like vanishes when you go to full screen and it's hard to find it again. Okay, so what we want to look at for a couple minutes here is just the way the music system works here. And this is fairly let's close all this stuff up. So one of the ways that we want to work, and I'm just going to look at this because I don't really understand it myself, but the way we kind of think about, let's just talk about it from a bird's eye view about how we approach the music systems here. So what we want to have our character be able to do is walk through our world and have these seamless musical transitions. So you can't necessarily just have where you can't just be able to walk, like you can't just use music clips, right? So the linear way of thinking about the way we do compose music, say for film and video, kind of goes out the window, because basically when you compose for film or for post, you're syncing it to a screen, to what you see on the screen, and basically it's locked. It's a linear system. You've got your timeline that goes forward, and so you can basically, if you have musical stabs, if you have emphasis, if you have tension, if you have release, if you have action, you can use music as as a supporter for whatever's happening in the scene to guide the audience in terms of emotional feel. So you want them to feel tension, like watch any horror movies that are happening right now because of Halloween stuff, and you always have a lot of dissonance. So a lot of dissonance, a lot of tension, a lot of like screechy stuff, because that gives us, that creates tension in our bodies, and that's what we want. And then we usually have a big boo kind of thing and scare everybody, and then that's the release. Well, we do the same thing, of course, and then we use music to emphasize that, to accent those sort of things. Well, the same thing happens, of course. We want to create the same sort of similar experience in music, in games, but because it's nonlinear, the characters can run all over the place, and they may run in and out, they may run out. That we need to be able to have the music be dynamic and be like dynamically, not composed, although you can do dynamic composing, but be dynamically mixed and created and blended on the fly. And so that's what the music systems before, the interactive music hierarchy is over here. So we've got these different kind of music hierarchy systems in here, and let me close up all my stuff. So what we've got here in the case of this one, they've created essentially two separate systems for the music. So what it's going to do is, as you walk between regions, you're going to want to walk between, like, say, the village and the woodlands and the different areas, and you have different musical themes. And then, of course, you're going to have transition areas where you're not in there. So you're walking along a path for a long time. And as you walk along a path, you're not going to be in any one of these. Let's close all these up. You're not going to be in any of these. So we have ambient, desert, dungeon, nothing, village, woodlands day, and woodlands night. So they actually have two of these set right here. And then, of course, we have a nothing. So a nothing still is going to play music, but it's going to be during when they're not in any one of these other ones, maybe during a transition area. But the catch here is, not only do we want to have the music with all of these things happening here, but we want them to be in sync. And we want them to like trigger. So either on a bar or on a phrase or something along those lines that basically allow this to switch between these. And so these are all switch containers, actually. So this is controlled by a switch. So there's a music switch container up here. And so that basically it's going to transition between each of these states. So it's going to be using a state, a switch state, basically that's gonna, I'm sorry, it's a switch, not a state. It's gonna switch between each of these here, so that basically you can only ever have one playing. Because if you recall, switches only allow you to have one of these playing at any given time right there. So that's a good thing, because what we don't want to have happen is these things pile up on top of each other and have multiple playing. So if I ran inside and outside of the ambient thing real quickly, we don't want that thing to actually blow up and get like too many of these things happen at once. So we've got this essentially the switch here. So that's what we've got. Then we've also got this music, the enemy's music system going on here. And so we've got music enemy layers. And so what they're going to do here is, as you walk into a musical, as you walk into one of these systems right here, like a dungeon or something like that, and then maybe you have an enemy come in there. And so this one's going to be determined. This one's determined by switch. This one's going to be determined by proximity. So these are going to be playing, and as I get closer to it, they're going to be coming. They're going to get in and get louder and quieter based off of how close you are to these enemies here. So essentially, we have two different systems right here, and in each of these, they're all going to be in the same tempo, all in the same key, so that any one of them can blend and they can fit together. Doing key changes, you can do it, but it's gonna require another layer of sophistication that I have no idea how to do. So I don't know how to do any of the music stuff yet, but like that's just the concept of trying to do key changes during a game would be pretty tough. At least in this, using this kind of non-linear fashion. You can of course use linear music in there as well. Like I don't know, I guess like there's a lot of them out there, but I've just been like, I was playing Death Stranding not that long ago, and they do an interesting, they approach the music in an interesting way with that game. Has anybody else played it, by the way? I can't remember. So I thought somebody else had played that. It's interesting how they have a soundtrack, and so they basically license, they get bands to like write, or an artist to write music for the thing, and so it's like it's almost like a music video. When you run into a scene, it actually pulls up credits like in MTV in the lower corner. It shows you the artist and the title, and it blends into the song, and it actually has like the song of the artist, and then it comes out. So it's kind of like plays like the album version of the song. So that's kind of a linear version of it, but it's threaded in such a way that, I mean, because the game is so muted and long, it's like an open world one, and you spend probably 90% of your time just running from one place to the next. It's forever long, but it's cool. That's part of the experience. Is it's supposed to be this like oppressive monotony, and it's an interesting storyline. So, well, it's Japanese storyline, so it's kind of bizarro Japanese style, but with this, like the idea of trying to compose for this, because I mean, I'm guessing pretty much everybody here, we're in the music program here, we're all composers to some degree and performers to some degree, some more than others, but being able to write music for this is a specialized skill set. So you can actually write just general, actually, like I was looking at this the other day. I don't know if anybody was in General Recital on Friday, but I did a little bit of this. I gave a talk about this in General Recital. But if we go to our asset store, this is the old version of it, but let me pop out. Actually, let's do it here. If we just look at assets and let's look at music. Oh, come on. I thought I was going to do a pull down menu. Let's look at audio. And let's just look at, actually, do they have music in that list? Where's my music? Let's just look at music for a second. So if you wanted to, you could start, if you get some musical ideas, you could actually just go through and, wait. So like, okay, let's just look at this for a sci-fi soundtrack. Let's just look at one of these right here. So if you were to buy some soundtrack stuff, this isn't really selling me on this thing, but what they should do is they're going to give you layers, and it's essentially like stemmed. You're going to stem these things out, and so basically you're going to have different movements. And so your job is to, if you're composing for this thing, is to create essentially like a base layer, a couple different like foundational layers, and things that can layer on top of them, but that they can be mixed and matched and blended on top of one another in ways that make it dynamic and different so that it doesn't get boring to listen to, because we've probably all had, like, some games that we've been playing where essentially it's just looping the music or looping the music, and you just like start to lose your mind because it's like sometimes these games, if you're playing them for hours on end, they get really, really uh like burned into your brain, and the music, so you end up turning the music off or just muting the whole game altogether because it's just too annoying to listen to. So if we want to look at how the music system is done here a little bit, under our views here, we have this thing called the music editor right here. And if we click on the music editors here, we can start to look at how these things are set up. And so this is like going to be how we're doing this. And so right now I have the ambient. So this is just going to be our ambient layers right here. So these are all our components right here. So it's basically your live mixing, but you're live mixing in the game. And so we can see our loop points right here. So those are the green is our loop points right here. But then we also see this right here. I don't think we're not showing this in terms of bars and beats, but we're showing it in terms of time. But what we're going to see here is that the music enemies right here, the music enemies can only trigger on a downbeat right here. So even if I come in proximity to an enemy that's not, that, like, if I run towards an enemy, so this one's meant to be that, like, as you get closer to enemies, it's going to fade in, because as we said, it's going to trigger these, and it's a function of like how close you are. So when I get closer to something, it's going to trigger the music enemies, but it's going to trigger on beat right here. So if I encounter an enemy from a distance right here, it's not going to happen, nothing's going to happen until I get here, but we're going to have it set so that it's far enough away that it's going to trigger this thing so that it will be in sync, so that everything stays in sync. So you have the ability to do this. So this is a music cue right here that's going to basically trigger one of these it's controlling these ones over here. But we can see all of our elements right here. And so you can start to mix and match all of your different elements to create massive variety. I don't know how to do this yet, but I know that it's there. And that's like at least in some part how we get in and do this. Let's see, do we have bars and beats? I guess we do have bars and beats to snap to. I'm surprised it only shows us in terms of music timeline. It doesn't show us in bars and beats right up there, but that's okay. Cool. So it's worthwhile spending a couple minutes going through this and looking at this. And so these are controlled by RTPCs. So game syncs. So these are going to be in our RTPCs, game parameters. So I believe it's under player, I think is where it's done. No. Where was that? Is it gameplay? Music enemy theme volume and music. Yep. So we just have our music enemy theme volume. So that's the music enemy one. I don't know where the regular music one is controlled from. It's a switch game parameter. That might be a state. Music states. Yeah. So okay, yeah. So this makes sense. So the RTPC is controlled by the enemy. So that's because that the level is controlled by as a function of distance, and distance is an RTPC. So we calculate the distance to an enemy, and then as it get closer, we can say, okay, bring in the volume for the enemy as a gate, well, it's on this work unit right here, but music enemy theme volume. Then the other one is going to be our states right here. So this is our music regions. And so the music regions are going to be set up somewhat similar to the way we did the augs sends for the environmental augs is. Remember when we would go in, and as we went into the Woodlands Village, we would enable a different kind of reverb, an augs reverb. So this is done in a similar fashion. So that's what we're going to look at doing here right now, is implementing this state here. So let's see. Oh yeah, I guess I just had some notes here. So the region themes actually in here, in these region themes, each of these has essentially like a bunch of different phrasings right there. So they have like anywhere between 3 and 10 different music statements there. So like here's a bunch going on of things going on here to give it some different sound. And then each enemy has its own 3 to 4 segments. So you get lots of diversity with relatively small sets. Although I feel like that is still quite a bit of music that we have going on in there. Okay, so let's go. Let's do this over here. So what we want to do is let's see. Yep, let's go to our certification 301 lesson 8. I guess I probably already pulled up there. So what we want to do here is kind of do the same thing that we had done before with the woodlands where we want to set up a trigger system here. And so basically if I go inside of the village, I want to trigger the music for the village. And if I leave, I want the music to turn off for the village. So then if we're going in these different areas, I don't know if they're showing the village, like I don't think they have all the regions set up for this. Bank regions. I don't think we have a village one. We do. Okay. Well, we're gonna set up not the bank because the bank those the bank regions are what load the sound banks for that region. We want to do. I guess don't need it there. So let's add an object here. Let's add a sphere. And let me see if I can find out where that is so I can see it. Scale this thing up. So it's floating right now. So I need to move that down. What is it? Q. Actually, let's do W. So I wanted to encompass the village area right here. Like it mentioned in the text that when you're creating your like colliders, these trigger colliders, um, like you can draw your own shapes, these mesh systems they're basically complex colliders, but it has to keep track of all the polygons in there, and we kind of know this just from general gameplay stuff that the more detail you have, the more complex, the more CPU intensive it is. Well, it turns out spheres are the least CPU intensive because basically to calculate the sphere is super simple. It just needs a point in space and a radius. And to manage that, it's hyper performant. So you hear that term performant. So performant means things that it means high level of performance. Like so, if something's performant, it means like or performant optimized, meaning it's optimized for performance right there. So let's scale this up again. Make this pretty huge. Yeah, that's probably good. It's hard to see it, but let's see where that's coming up. Yeah, it looks pretty good. And whoops, let's go back to my sphere. I could change the name of this. I guess I could. I don't even know if I'm supposed to call it something else, but let's see. I'm just gonna call it whatever village. Doesn't matter what I want to call it. And I'm gonna find the red trigger red. Oops, trigger. Where's my trigger red? There it is. Just so we can see it. And on that one, we want to, actually, I'm going to call it village trigger sphere or something. Just so I remember what that is. And we want to turn this off of, so we want a sphere collider, but we want to make it is trigger. If I don't have that as trigger, it makes it so it's a hard surface, so I can't pass through it. So now it allows us to become as a trigger. And now what we want to do is we want to add a script to this thing, so that basically we trigger the music for the village sound on that one. Actually, I want to hear what the music one is, so we can see if this is working. Where's the music? It's not ambient, not desert, not dungeon. Let's listen to the village one. Okay. So we know that's the one that should trigger as we go through this thing right here. So let's add a component. Let's create a script. We're going to call this one on, we're going to call this set music state. I don't like how well, I guess we could call it state, but I think switch is a better one. Set music state. So it doesn't exist. So I'm going to say new script, set music state, create an ad. Cool. Let's open this up and let's do some coding. So I'm going to pretty much just follow along here. I'm just kind of like I can discuss what's going on here, but this is not my like big brain doing this stuff. This is me just following along. So what we want to do is basically we're going to have this thing as a trigger. We can get rid of all this stuff in here. We don't need any of this in here. And what we want to do is, let's see. Okay, so we want to do void. We'll create a function here on trigger enter. Let's see. getting some. Okay, well, I'm just gonna type it all out because it said to do like it's supposed to do some autofilling for you, but it's not working for me. So I want to do this one as a private. So before we've done public variables, but or public stuff, but I want to do private on this one because I want to keep it just inside of this one so that you can't see it from outside. Enter and lighter other. So what this is doing is basically it's going to this does the same thing that as when we do the the collision detection on trigger enter. When we use the component for on trigger enter, like basically, let me just make a dummy object here and explain this for a second. Come on. Oh, why am I stuck? Let's close all this up. So with this empty game object right here, if I were to AK trigger enter, we've got this trigger object right here. So right now it basically says none. Well, that's doing the same thing what we have to do right here. Right now it's saying collider other. So it's basically saying if anything collides with this thing, do this thing right here. So this collider right here is basically looking at the collider that we just created, the sphere collider, and it's going to say listening. It's going to trigger based off of anything that's in there. So that's a problem. And as we've seen before, like if you recall at the very beginning, that if there's like a tree or if there's anything, and in this case, we've got an entire village in there. So it's going to trigger no matter what. So what we need to do is we need to create some code so that it basically will allow us to, oh wait, yeah. So that it will allow us to just trigger off the player. And so the way we do that is we do using a compare system. So we go, is it the player that's actually colliding with this thing? So only trigger this thing if it's the player that's actually through there. So again, we did it before by using with the component system. We used we just drag the player in there. But this one we're going to do it through code. And so what we want to do is, so we have to create a public on this thing. Let's do a public here. Public AK Wise state and on trigger enter state. So we're naming this thing. So this is the name we're giving it, on trigger enter state. And then what we want to say is so we want to create an if. So basically, we're gonna have to create an if statement. So an if then. So if this is the player, what I want you to do is trigger this state up here. So we're setting the state up here. So this is the AK stuff. This is how we connect to Wwise. So we're saying if the player comes into this, if it is the player, I want you to trigger this, which is going to be controlled up on the outside of our component because it's public. I'll explain that in a minute if you don't remember. But if and this is the weird one, I didn't know. Like for me, I just had to straight up copy this thing because I don't really. It's probably in the documentation somewhere, but I would have not known how to do something like this. If the other, so this is the other right here. If the other thing, in other words, if the thing that's colliding with this thing is compare tag, and if it's what we call the player, which is again, I wouldn't have known this. If the player is true, if it is so in other words, if this is true, then I want you to execute. I don't know why I did double braces there. Then I want you to execute this code. So if this is true, on trigger enter state, I want you to set value. That it makes sense, but again, I would have never been able to synthesize this thing on my own. So basically, it's going to set the value based off of if this is true. In other words, if the player goes through, I want you to trigger the state that we set up in here. So let me save this and see if this works. Where is what did I put on the village trigger sphere? So I've got the shape Should show up. My public. Oh, my public should show up there. Did I screw something up? Where's my error? Oh. Yeah, what's... That looks right to me. Oh, I do need a second. There we go. All right, now it should show up and compile. Come on. So what I should see here is that public should show up right here. There it is. And what we want this to be is, I want this to be the village music, right? So let's go under, not magic zones, music regions, village. I think, is that what I wanted? Yeah. Cool. So let's play it. Cool. Works. So here's the problem, though. Problem is that when I entered that and it totally worked, we heard it kind of, I don't know, that was a weird kind of crossfade that it did in there. So it was kind of immediate. It was immediate on that one, but it was, I would say it worked. It was enough. And when you're playing the game, you're not necessarily focusing on this stuff. It's tricky with the audio stuff because it's invisible. So you can get away with a little bit more. Like if you have something that's out of sync or out of whack in visuals, it's super noticeable. Like we let it slide a lot of times. Things like, I don't know, jumping and bumping into things and stuff, that's like, it doesn't really mimic the way the real world works. Like, you know, when she runs, she's a capsule collider, and if I get her close to the cliff, I make the capsule collider bigger than her so that she doesn't have an arm that goes through the cliff or something like that, or through the bricks. But if I make the thing too large, if I make a capsule collider too large, she can't get close enough to materials. And so you're like, that doesn't really mimic real life. But just because we played a lot of video games, we're just kind of used to it, and we just let that stuff slide. The newer next gens of, like, as game engines get faster and faster and better, they're going to get better and more realistic. Like, I don't know, I guess I'm still thinking back to the PS5 demo that came out last year, like the teaser trailer. Although there's a lot more stuff coming out now, but basically they had this demo of kind of a similar one where you have the hero. She was running through this village, and she walks through a door, and as she walks through the door, she drags her hand along the door. It's just like a subtle cue, right? It's a subtle thing that, like, when she walks by something, if she walks by something too close, she puts her hand on it, as you would in real life. And so those are the little things that are like getting better with these systems. But we can get away with a little bit of this, little bit of the sloppiness in music because you can't quite see it. Of course, we want like hits and stabs and that kind of stuff to be like in sync. But you know, if like the dialogue, like narration, came half a second too late, you'd be okay with that. But the catch right here is, though, what we need to do is we need to create an exit system here. So what we want to do is we want to exit out of this so that it goes back to, so if I go into the village, so where's my starting point? Over here, my training area. As I come through here, as I leave to go out of the village here, maybe over to Woodlands or to the, what do I call this area? I haven't really actually played the game very much. Or to go to the Pine Forest over here, that it's going to exit. So let's go back over to our code and let's change this thing. So what we need to do is, we have our on trigger enter. We need to create an on trigger exit. So let's create this. The on trigger exit. As long as it's the player, I want to set this one, set the value. And so we need to create a public void on trigger enter state. And so we also need to create this, double this up, on trigger exit state. Whoops. Tritter, that's not right. Cool. So I believe that's all I have to do on that one. And so that basically we set the exit. So when I exit this sphere, I want this thing to happen. So let's save this, go back over here, and we should see, because we have another public on trigger exit state over here. Come on. There we go. And we want this to go back to nothing, so that the music region goes to nowhere, not none. We want to go to nowhere. Though none is a powerful tool, because basically if you have music playing in the background and you want it to go to silence, you just set your music cue to none. And so that basically you can have some random silences in there as well. So, okay, let's play. Blocked off. How do I get to? Run up there? Nope. Damn it. Right, well, I can just run back. Must have broke it. I can watch my profiler, but I must have done. Let me double check that. On trigger. Oh, because this is exit state. Give this a second to update. You can always tell it's this little thing in the corner right here. That gives you your update status. So as soon as this goes away, that means you're good to go. There we go. As long as you don't have any errors. Got a couple of cautions, but nothing that's going to stop me from playing. You can also use your profiler to double check this stuff too. I don't like that transition. But... Cool, worked. So just to kind of crossfade there, I didn't really like that one because it didn't do like a hard ending. I mean, it works, but I don't love the way that works right there. But that was pretty simple, a bit of simple code, and that was actually pretty revealing to me. The next stuff I thought was like the next code was pretty interesting. So what happens if we have? Oh, let's find save. What if we have overlapping regions? So, in other words, if we have the village right here in the pine forest, and because I did this as a sphere collider, if I did another sphere collider over here and they have some overlap, you have to be like, okay, well, I don't want both of those to be playing at the same time, because it's as a switch state, we can only have one set of music playing at a time. And so if we have overlapping areas, how do we decide which one we want to have playing? And so you could have something like, and I guess what I would say is, I'm going to copy this, duplicate. And if I were to do this one, and I'm going to change this one to a different color. Let's change this to, I'm going to change this to whatever project. So trigger, let's do trigger blue for this one instead. There we go. So we can kind of see in this like overlapping zone right here. What I would probably want to have happen is I'm like, okay, if I'm in the village, even if I collide with this one, well, okay, maybe what I'll do is let's say like, if I'm in the village and I run this way, I want it to trigger right on the woodlands and disregard village. And then as soon as I go over here, I want to go to woodland. If I go from woodlands into village, I want to trigger right here and disregard the woodlands one. But it's not as simple as that. You actually have to create a code hierarchy for doing this sort of thing. And so it's a little bit, so this is where I'm not going to do this in class because it's a lot of code actually. And basically this is where I say, just follow along and do the instructions. It's really not too bad. You can do it, but like I said, you don't even actually have to go all the way through and do it. I read it. I go, okay, I got it. I understand what you're trying to do, because they give you a lot of like, they're trying to teach you kind of general code stuff, like with if thens and states. Like, well, I don't think they're not using switches, but basically they're trying to teach you the code theory behind the stuff, and it's a valiant effort. But man, if you don't know what you're doing, it can be pretty brutal. So I would say just follow along, but just enough so that you can get through the quizzes, and you should be just fine with that. So it's because it's like it takes a while. Like if you're gonna go through it, it takes like probably a good hour to get through that, to really like to let it sink in. So that's going to be the next section that they have going on right there. And then I think that they also have oh yeah, and then the last part, what they did is they want to add some subtle environmental cues. So if we were to go in and look at this area here, what they wanted to do is, how do we add like some subtle stuff? So maybe you have a side, like maybe you're like, as your character's running through, you have a mission, you have like a quest that you're going on, and maybe you have some side quests that you want to have going on here, and maybe you have like an elf hidden over in the village, over here, and you want to like, it's not an explicit part of the storyline, but you want it to be like, to add some sort of element. So if I'm running through the village here, and as I get closer to this elf that's like hidden in the village over here or something like that, that's going to give me some magic, some extra magic or something like that, or a side quest, or like I said, some sort of extra thing that maybe I want to add a little bit of an extra musical element, something that you're like, that cues you in at, like, emotionally. You're like, as you're running along, you're like, wait, something just changed. Like something like got like told me that there's something else happening in the scene. And that's one of the cool things about sound, is that you can use it as a non-visual cue, as it's a non-explicit cue, because you don't need to see it to perceive it. So and we can use that, we can leverage that in terms of gameplay. So if I'm running over here, I'm like, wait a minute, it's something just changed a little bit. I must be in an area where something's going on. And maybe you actually even create like an elf melody, so that in every one of these things that you've got like or like a pixie, like a little pixie, like fairy thing over here, that as you go through villages, that as soon as I hear that, I'm like, oh, I'm in the proximity of a fairy. So what you might want to do is, as I'm running along here, instead of triggering something, you're just going to fade it in as a function of proximity. So what we can do is we can actually just say, make this thing louder as I get closer to the thing, like using a musical cue, not just a sound effects, but a musical cue that increase as I go along here, and it's going to be playing here. And what they want us to do here is, as I get closer to this waterfall, we want to add a harp. So the harp plucking comes in as I get closer to this thing here. And once again, it's quite a fair amount of code, more than than what's like reasonable to show in class, just because it's going to be me just following along the instructions just like you would. The catch is, though, like if you've run into snags and doing some troubleshooting there, it can cause problems, things like double brackets and quotations and semicolons, and excuse me, knowing where to put those things can be kind of confusing. They talk a little bit about like data types in this thing. So you have things like floats and unsigned integers and strings and some of that kind of stuff. But like I said, you can get through this good enough on your own, that you wouldn't, at least enough to get by for this sort of thing. I think the music stuff is really interesting, and I'm excited to learn a lot more about it, because I want to get better at this sort of thing. But I think now is not the time to really dig into the music. We'll do that next semester if you want to do that. Or if you're not taking this class and you decide you want to get back into this, they've got the Wwise 201. You can do that on your own, and that's a great way to get into this stuff. But I do think being a composer for games has a lot of appeal. We're all kind of some people in here are way more composers and musicians than they are, say, sound designers, in terms of like sound effects and sort of thing. But and if you want to become like a game composer, which you can do, you can become just a composer for games. That being steeped in this information and understanding this logic is really helpful, because if you understand how this is done, it allows you, it will inform and influence your compositional style and your components. Because then if you know how this works, you know how to upload the stuff to the asset store. And shoot, maybe you're just like, this weekend you're like, oh, I'm gonna lay down some ideas, and maybe it never turns into an actual song that you're going to use, that you're never going to release or use. But you're like, I like it. It's just an idea. Well, maybe you can just flesh that idea out into these like little components, throw it up on the asset store, sit back and collect, I don't know, your millions of dollars, maybe 2 million if you're lucky. But you know, you can collect your $1 million in the next year if you wanted to. But I don't imagine these are big money makers. But dude, if you've got just ideas sitting on your hard drive, throw them up on the internet and at least try to make some passive income on this stuff. It wouldn't hurt. Like, you might as well throw it up there. It doesn't. Well, I don't know. I'm curious if it costs you anything to get it up onto, or if they just strictly take a percentage. I'm guessing that they probably there's probably a pay barrier just so that people aren't barfing up like everything under the sun in their library, because there's probably like a $50 fee or something like that to get it up there. But because otherwise everybody would just posting their entire freaking libraries and putting them up there. But it might be worth just checking out. So if somebody actually does this, I'd love to hear about what their experience is on getting assets up there. So what I want to look at now, okay, so that's lesson 8. So moving into lesson 9, there is no, if you look under this, there is no certification for what lesson 9 right here, and that's because what the lesson 9 is about implementing this integration into your own projects, and it's really not that bad. Like, we've done it before. Basically, they just walk you through this Unity system right here. So like I have a, like right here, I don't have, I'm doing some tests with Unity and Max. For this other project that I'm working on right now, I'm actually recreating my own entire game engine. So I'm disregarding Wwise. I get rid of Wwise, and I'm using Max as my game engine completely. So I'm writing my own game engine using Max. And so I'm using Max through OSC right here. So if I wanted to, all I had to do is just go here, integrate Wwise into the project. So you could say, which version of Wwise do you want to integrate into this version of Unity? And it will do all the backend work for you. This has gotten so much better in the last few years than it used to be. It was so hard. A few years ago, you had to do command line stuff. You had to do a lot of programming. You had to do a lot of hard stuff. They wrote these beautiful scripts for us that all we really have to do is just press go, and it does its thing. It's pretty neat. So it makes our life a whole lot easier, because we're going to see as soon as we get to Fmod next week, Fmod isn't quite as friendly as Wwise is in terms of the stuff. But we also have under our audio kinetic, well, not the utilities, but under our Wwise settings right here. This is under Wwise, by the way, this is under Unity 2018. Under 2020, yeah, 2020, it just shows up under not Wwise settings, it just shows under game settings right here. But this stuff right here, so automatically add listener to the camera. So what we would want to do is click on that and create Wwise global game object. Actually, let me do this. Let's create a new, let's close this one out and create a new project. Let's save. I'll just run through the whole yeah, I'll run through the process real quick once. It's just going to get kind of gnarly. But if we go to, where's my Unity hub? Let's create a new one. So this is going to be with what, 2020.1.10. Let's do this. So Wwise integration test. Takes a little while for it to build. But there's a couple things that, like, I just want to point out a couple things that from that discussion that I think are pretty cool and important. I don't know what, it always takes so long. On hope there was a bug in 2019 .1.6 that I was using before, and it was causing all sorts of problems. I don't know if anybody else got caught in that got caught in that loop where it basically was, it's weird, where basically it did the default layouts. It was like, basically it couldn't read the default layouts, so you had to do this stupid workaround thing. Okay, so let's save this thing, save our scene, and what I'm going to do is, I don't know why that's there. Let's close this out. Let's go back, see if Unity shows up. Wwise init test, integrate Wwise into the project. Let's going to do, I'm not going to change anything. I'm just going to let it run default. If you don't have the SDK installed, it'll give you like a red square here. So you have to go back into your Wwise installation and add some other stuff. But this looks good for me for right now. So I'm just going to say integrate. This, like, it's hard to stress how badass what it's doing right now is. this is all this, it's doing it like as automatically integrating this thing in, whereas used to, you have to do this, you had to do all this like code to connect everything, and it was awful. It was super prone to breaking. This is also kind of something, it's a, I won't say it's risky, but when you're working on a client project, because this is doing a lot of like back end scripting to your Unity project. It's scary. You're like, okay, I've got your client project. They've been working on this project for whatever, a couple months. And you're like, all right, I'm gonna inject a bunch of this stuff into your project, and hopefully it doesn't break it. And if it does break it, you're like, oh man. Like, so you always have version controlling, so you can always go back and undo it. So like, make sure you have some sort of Git skills. If you've never used any Git before, that's another thing to kind of get into and learn a little bit about. Okay, so now we can open both of these. Actually, I'm just going to open up I'm not going to open up the Wwise project. I'm just going to open up this. So what this one did is well, let's go take a look at where I put that, just to make it clear. So when I created that project, mine is under storage, and I have Unity projects, Wwise int test. So what it did is it put the Wwise project right here. It doesn't have to live inside of it doesn't have to live inside of this folder. It can live outside of this, and you just have to point to it, which is fine. So if it doesn't live there, so it would be under project settings. Where's my project settings? Should be under here, right? There it is. So under here, we have our Wwise editor. And so basically you can do your Wwise project path. You can point it to a different location. So it doesn't have to live inside of that, which is fine. And then of course you do have to use your Wwise application path right here. So, and if you're working on a client project, chances are you won't actually have your Wwise project embedded inside of the Unity project, because they're going to be working on the code and you're going to be working on it in some other way. So that's usually not how that's going to work. So we have this now, and of course we have our Wwise picker shows up, which is cool. A lot of Wwise stuff there. Because it can be a challenge to convince people to use Wwise. They just don't understand. But I'm hoping you're starting to appreciate what Wwise can do for your entire project, because it's like trying to do all the stuff that we're talking about doing, all this like interactive and integration stuff, doing it from here is really difficult. You can do it in code, but it's pretty tough. That's why Wwise, it gives a lot of power to the users. So I already did Wwise Global for us, which is cool, aka initializer. But what we need to do is, if under our project settings again right here, so it's going to add listener to main camera by default and create Wwise Global Game by default. So what that means is, by having these two selected right here, if I go through and I create a new scene, so let's create a new scene. Where's my scene? There it is. So if I create a scene, call this one dummy, and let's open up dummy scene. Sure, save that one. So when I created this dummy scene right here, you can see it says automatically add AK listener to main camera. Go to add Wwise settings to disable this functionality. So are we in dummy right now? Yeah, we're in dummy right now. So you can see just by adding dummy, so I'm in the dummy scene right here, that it added the Wwise Global right here, and on my main camera, it added the AK game object and AK audio listener. That's really useful. I mean, it's like you could do that manually if you needed to, but every scene, of course, has to have an audio listener right there. And what's cool is it looks like, yeah, the defaulted it. Usually, like, let's do, well, no, if I create a main like a dummy scene, let's just try this real quick. I'm going to turn off the, whoops, not preferences, but product preferences. I'm going to turn off I'll create the global game object, but I'm not going to add listener to main camera right here. So let's create another new scene. Let's create a scene. And let's go to dummy 2. Save. It's fine. Yeah, so it didn't like that. But we're in dummy 2. Are we in dummy 2 right now? Cool. So on our main camera, what it did is added a default listener right here, but it did not add a listener. So what we could do is we could say add component. This is AK. And what we could do is just turn this one off if you wanted to, or you could even just remove this component. And see if that'll clear it out. Yep, that lets me play it now. So you have to do that manually, but that's kind of cool. It's on by default, but it's just important that you do know that it's there. So when you start when you create new scenes, it'll automatically add all the components and all the stuff you need. So add this Wwise global here. So the AK audio initial or AK initializer there. So in terms of session organization, you'd set up a Wwise, some Wwise, like I would create a Wwise folder, a Wwise like game, create empty and just call it Wwise. So this is where you're going to do all of your Wwise code, like a lot of your like Wwise scripting and like Wwise specific stuff. So that if you have if you're working on a team and other people are working with us, they know not to really touch anything in this folder right here or on this game object and all these components below it. It's just they don't touch anything. So that's going to be like reserved for you. Even though if you have objects throughout the space, you're going to be adding Wwise stuff in there as well. So let's talk a couple minutes about other resources for going beyond this. So I like if you've not gotten the vibe, I'm pretty weak on the code side of things, on the scripting side of things. One of my goals here is to get a lot better at the scripting sort of the stuff, because it's just I feel like it's just like I understand like kind of base. I understand some basic code, like whatever C++ and C# and JavaScript and Java, and I can kind of muddle my way through that stuff. But implementing in Unity is still very, very foreign to me. So I feel like this is something that I really want to get better at, because I think you need to have those kind of chops to really integrate this stuff well. So how do we actually get better at scripting in Unity? So there's a couple different resources we have here. One of the things that I started on a while back, but I haven't looked at it for a while, is Coursera. So so if you've not been to Coursera before, Coursera it's kind of like LinkedIn Learning, right? You just pay for classes that you can just like learn all sorts of stuff in here. But we actually are allowed at CU Denver, or not CU Denver, but the CU system, University of Colorado system. There's like you can see that a lot of these people are put like Stanford, Penn. A lot of these, some of them are free, some of them are paid, but they're actually a lot of universities have classes on here, and it turns out the CU system has quite a few classes on here, and any of the ones that are on here we get for free. So if you want to get to these for free, the only way I can figure out how to do it, the way I've done it in the past, is through I'll show you how I always found it. Come on. Here's how I've always gone to it, is through, and this is going to look a little different because this is through my UCD access, because mine's faculty, but same sort of difference here. So if I get into my UCD access, and so this is yours is going to look a little different because it's going to be student side of stuff, but you'll have these things like resources here. So you should see a see resources somewhere in your menus, pull down, something like that. And when you click on this thing, that you have, then on the see resources home, you have this thing called training. So in training right here, so we have things like Skillsoft, we have LinkedIn Learning. So you can also get the LinkedIn Learning from here, but we also have Coursera over here. So if you click on Coursera, and we've got a bunch of classes here, but this is broken. I couldn't get this to work earlier today. So if I hit, like, basically I want to log in with the University of Colorado. I'm gonna log in here, and it breaks. Oh, it's working. It was broken like an hour ago. So now it's a lot like LinkedIn Learning. So that's the only way I know how to get to it. You can probably just Google around and find a way to get to the Coursera stuff. I think you can just go to Coursera.com and say log in with my company information, and you can just use your UC Denver stuff, and it'll take you there as well. So let's see. They have C# in here. So let's do C#. They have a C# Unity class. Yeah, C# programming and Unity game development. Here it is. I think this is the one I started. So it's, yeah, the teacher's kind of weird. So it's 28 hours to complete. It's pretty burly, but it's an older one, but it kind of walks you through the scripting and teaches you basically like a very linear process programming. So it's intended for people who've never programmed before at all. So if you've never programmed before at all, it gets you in, it gets you coding, and it gets you understanding kind of the scripting, but not just C sharp, but C sharp in the context of Unity, which is pretty awesome. So that's a good resource. The other one, of course, is LinkedIn Learning. They have like classes on here. So if I look at C sharp, I just did a search for this earlier today. Unity C sharp. So C sharp for Unity game development right here. It's a little bit older. Both of those are a little bit older, but let's just see what it's all about.
Then conditions.
So basically, it looks pretty straightforward. Conditions. Well, this isn't. Maybe it is for. Doesn't seem like. Wow, that doesn't really look very extensive. This looks like it doesn't. I don't know. It looks like it's a good introduction, but I think you need more than that. And understanding how to talk to actually more advanced up to Unity. But the biggest one probably would be Unity itself. So if we go like Unity, they have like tons of skill. They have just tons of like start learning Unity, and they have like C sharp, like scripting. Let's look at script. Not say there. Let's look at scripting. They have a whole like survival guide. That's pretty awesome. So there's a whole huge, like I'm still kind of confused. Like it's kind of scattered in the Unity learning system, and you used to have to pay for it, but during COVID they made everything free, and they've just left everything free. So you used to have to pay for a subscription for all the learning and teaching stuff, but now they've got this thing, so it's pretty awesome. So I'd like to spend some more time with some of these things because they're like concise, short little things, and they give you all the materials you need, and they seem pretty sweet. So I want to spend some more time with this one right here as well. The last thing I wanted to talk about real quick here is as we move into Unreal. So Unreal uses this system called Blueprint. So Blueprint is kind of like Max MSP, where you can code and do all your logic without writing any code at all. It's basically node-based like wireframe programming. Well, that's one of the things that's really been missing in Unity. And so Unity just bought Bolt. And let's take a look actually, since I have it here. Let's just go ahead, let's go back to my scene. Let's go back to my sample scene here. Cool. So I'm in my sample scene right here. Let's clear that out. What we can do is we've got this thing. Where's Bolt? In my assets. It used to be about $100 to buy this thing right here called Bolt. So let's import this and import. Let's look it up over here in our asset store. Let's see if they give it any like videos for what it is. No, they're not going to give us a quick little video. Basically, what it allows you to do is allows you to completely script your game without actually writing any code. And this is what we're seeing is a big trend happening in the game dev world. It's been around. I mean, like Max and Pure Data were kind of the pioneers of this kind of like signal flow thing. We call it data flow programming. So, and like hardcore coders will think that this is like silly, that it's not like coding. It's still the same logic. It's just implemented in a different way. And so what you're going to do, let's see if it's done doing it over here. Cool. Let's go back to my scene and let's look at my assets. Install Bolt. So let's do, I can't remember which one I'm supposed to do. Tools, install Bolt. Tools, install Bolt. Yes. Sure, I'll just do everything. Because at this point, the reason I'm talking about this is because we're going to be departing away from Unity pretty much for the rest of the semester until we get towards the end of the semester. We're going to start building out our own game, our demo game. And but if you want to start working on this on the side, this is a really cool thing to get fluent with. I've only opened it like once, but it's confusing to me. For me, it's weird because it's not integrated as part of Unity. It's an add-on. Say yes. I'm just gonna go through let's do I actually want to do programmer naming on this. Well, let's do this one. Yep, that's fine. Yep, that's fine. There are some bolt tutorials, but I want to learn a lot more about this thing. But basically, what it allows you to do is do all the stuff with this code that we've been doing, but doing it from a visual scripting environment instead of doing it from the Visual Studio environment. And you're gonna watch me fail because this is basically as far as I got before. But both is a way that you can. Well, I'm not going to go on and on and on about it because I don't really know how it works. But basically, it allows you to do things like on mouse down, event self. I want you to like if it's true, I want you to add force. So add force to this thing. So um, it's still how you have to have some like a kind of a programming logic brain, but it allows you to just do all this stuff in the game without actually writing any code. It's pretty rad. So you can't screw up. There's no typos or anything like that, which is pretty rad. Um, yeah. So anyway, lightning speed. Huh. This is the one I want to start on this one. So this create platformer. There's a tutorial. There's a bolt tutorial platformer on this one. Pretty awesome. So if you want to get further with this thing, close. Let's see, tools, bolt. We have our bolt window. I'm trying to find my bolt windows right now. I don't know. I'm gonna blow it from here. Let's see, game object. Do they have it as bolt? Basically, there's two windows I'm missing right now. Is it panels? No. I'm gonna move on past this because I don't remember where it is. I'm trying to find my bolt stuff. There's basically. Oh, there it is. Okay, yeah. It's my graph. Let's throw that here, maybe. Actually, let's throw it here. And graph inspector. Maybe I'll put this here. Let's just try and create a 3 out of the cube. And on this, let's add inspector. Let's add some components. Bolt. State machines. I don't know. Like I don't know this stuff at all. Anyway, I'm not going to go down the road. I'm shooting in the dark right there. But if you so basically what I'm kind of the bottom line here is if you want to go further and actually start like making your own games and also just being able to speak fluently, getting good at C# and or bolt are going to be your next steps. So that's beyond the scope of this class, but that's where we're going to go. That's kind of what we want to have happen there. So I guess at this point, that's all I'm going to do is take attendance real quick and call it good from there. So if there's any questions, I'll stick around for a little bit, but we got a couple minutes off here, or like we'll finish up a couple minutes early. So what I'd like to see happen is by Friday is that you wrap up this Unity stuff, because next week we're diving straight into Fmod. Fmod, I think you'll really like. It doesn't have quite as good tutorials. We're going to spend 2 weeks on Fmod, I think, and then we're going to dive right into Unreal. And I love Unreal. Unreal's badass. So Unreal is a little bit more tasking on your computer, but it uses this thing called blueprints. So it has bolt, like what bolt is to Unity, blueprints is to Unreal, and it's built in. And that's all we're gonna do is work with Unreal, and it's pretty badass. So I guess with that, have a killer weekend and stay. Is anybody doing anything for Halloween? I mean, you're not really supposed to, so stay home. Don't get sick. But cool. All right, my friends. Well, I'll stick around if anybody has questions, but I will see you guys on next week.